Okay, welcome to the session on questionnaires. We're going to be looking at the strengths and limitations of this crucial research method. So you can see the picture straight away in the title slide, and most of you will be familiar with what a questionnaire is. A questionnaire is a form which is filled out by the participant themselves. And this is sometimes referred to actually in exam questions as self-completion. And self-completion shouldn't be a term that should scare you or worry you, because it literally just means that the participant does it. And so when we talk about self-completion questionnaires, we mean that people receive a piece of paper or they receive an online form, which they will then answer with a pen, with a keyboard themselves. They will not be asked questions like in an interview. There's an example on the left-hand side here of a crime questionnaire where you would sit down with a pen and you would circle the options that you would support. So what is your gender? You would circle male. What is your age, etc. And you would go down through the questionnaire. You'll notice from question 4 on this example, you start to get what we call the Likert scale. You don't actually need to know that terminology. The Likert scale is just when you have a scale from strongly disagree all the way along to strongly agree. It normally is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've gone for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. And you circle your response to a statement. So the statement here on question 5, for example, the current system of control, i.e. prison and fines, works well. If you strongly disagree with that, you would circle number 1. Questionnaires can sometimes be called surveys, so don't let that be put you off if you see that. Questionnaires are pre-coded. What we mean by this is they have been written in advance. There is a standardized copy of the questions which have been pre-written, pre-coded. An unstructured interview is not pre-coded. A structured interview is pre-coded, and a questionnaire most certainly is pre-coded, written in advance with set answers and set questions. You can have 2 different types of questions in questionnaires, and this is quite vital actually. You have open questions, which collect qualitative data. So, do you like the Bridge Academy? ? With a space for you to write in. Or you can have closed questions, which collect quantitative data. I like the Bridge Academy. 1, strongly disagree. 2, disagree. 3, don't know. 4, agree. 5, strongly agree. The latter, the closed questions collect quantitative data because you are able to tally up the number of people that have circled a certain number. So if we send out our questionnaire to 1,000 people, we know that 300 of them circled strongly disagree. And then that allows us to come up with our quantitative assessment. It's worth remembering whenever we discuss questionnaires that they can now be sent out online. And so the sample size for questionnaires can be absolutely enormous. You even get very, very, very simple questionnaires being done on Twitter by celebrities now, where they will say, which of these 4 options do you agree with? And some of those questionnaires will get millions of responses. Obviously, as sociologists, we don't tend to gather data from millions of people, although there is a questionnaire which does, and that's called the census, and the government sends that out every 10 years. And that is actually sent out on paper because the government can afford to do that. But questionnaires can get these enormous sample sizes by going online, and it's obviously a bit harder to do so with paper. Practical. So questionnaires are probably the most practical method that we study, and they're incredibly successful for that. There's no need to recruit and train interviewers. And you don't need to observe anybody doing this. You can just give them the questionnaire or email them the questionnaire. You don't have to go through great difficulties in collecting the data. It is normally incredibly easy to quantify. You even have machines that you can put questionnaires through that will just immediately tell you your quantitative data. What percentage of people said this? What percentage of people said that? There are online survey tools like SurveyMonkey and even Microsoft Forms that will immediately quantify your data for you. So that's incredibly fast and incredibly efficient, and it's normally free. Quick and cheap. So all of this process is incredibly quick and incredibly cheap. It would not take very long at all for me to gather data on hundreds of Bridge Academy students by simply sending out a Microsoft form for people to fill out. I would get that data back incredibly quickly and it would cost nothing. Now, practical difficulties or disadvantages, well, you've got a poor response rate. The problem with questionnaires, the biggest problem with questionnaires actually, is in terms of practicality, is the fact that people don't bother doing them. It's boring doing a questionnaire. People don't enjoy doing questionnaires. It's not most people's hobby to sit down for 10 minutes in their day and to tick yes, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. So most people just simply don't respond to questionnaires, particularly if they're sent through the post and then you have to send it back. People will not go through the effort to do that. And that's why online questionnaires are becoming more and more popular, because people are more likely to spend the 1 minute, 2 minute to do that kind of thing. You might have to provide incentives because of this. So because people can't be bothered to do questionnaires because they find them boring and they don't want to take up the time to do them, you might have to pay them to do the questionnaire. And this then becomes expensive in the first, for obvious reasons, but it can then become time consuming because you then need the data, you then need a way of sending the money across, you then need a way of tracking who's received the money, and then tracking whether they've given back the questionnaire. And so the whole thing becomes more complicated as soon as you start trying to pay people to do questionnaires. Ethical. Now, questionnaires are highly ethical. There are very, very few ethical problems here. They are way better than things like lab experiments, and even better than interviews. So they pose a lot fewer ethical problems in general. You always have informed consent. You're not forcing anybody to do a questionnaire because they do it themselves. So informed consent is just a part of the process. By agreeing to do the questionnaire, they have given informed consent. You might ask sensitive questions in your questionnaire, maybe questions around ethnicity or gender that people may be offended by. But because it's a questionnaire, they don't have to answer it. They are not obligated to answer it. It's not like an interview situation where you have somebody sat opposite you, pressuring you into answering that question simply by their physical presence. With a questionnaire, if you don't want to answer the question, you don't answer it. If you don't want to do the questionnaire anymore, you don't have to do the questionnaire. And so there's great ethical advantages there. This is a limitation in one sense, but it's a fairly easily dealt with limitation. Anonymity. So the researcher has to make sure that the participants, that the respondents are anonymous. So they cannot include their names in their research. And this practically, this just makes things a little bit more tricky. But with questionnaires, it's actually quite easily dealt with because you just make sure that they don't put their name on the questionnaire or on the online form, and then you've solved that problem. One of the bigger issues would be vulnerable groups. So it might be children, it might be people with learning difficulties, it could even more generally just be people from poorer backgrounds, working class, are more likely to have literacy difficulties. And therefore, giving them a questionnaire may cause embarrassment and stress to the participant. That's something that the sociologist would have to be conscious of. Reliability. Now, they are incredibly reliable. They are, in fact, the most reliable method that we study. Questionnaires are standardized. You have set out your research method on that form. That is the research method. That is the procedure. All the researcher has to do is give the form over, email the form over, and then the exact same process will be followed every single time. So reliability, remember, is the extent to which we can repeat our method and get the same or similar results. With questionnaires, we can repeat that same questionnaire, the exact same form, millions of times. There is no limit to how many times we can use that one questionnaire. The census, which is sent out to millions of households every 10 years, uses the exact same format for many of its questions. And the reason why is so it can be repeated again and again and again, and then we can start to compare. And that's the point that we're going to make here, that our closed questions in questionnaires lead to directly comparable data across different social groups. So, for example, if you did a crime survey in 2003, a little bit like the one we saw earlier in the presentation, If you give out that form today in 2020 with the exact same format, you can compare the results. And you could say something like 47% of people in 2020 within this sample are afraid of crime, whereas only 26% of people in 2003 were afraid of crime. And because you've used the exact same format, you can then compare those results really effectively. So they're incredibly reliable. So what are their disadvantages in terms of reliability? Nothing. They are very, very, very reliable. They are so, you cannot get more easily replicated than a questionnaire because it is just a form that you can use again and again and again. No weaknesses here at all. Validity. This is where the big problems come in for questionnaires. So questionnaires have limited validity. They do have some advantages when it comes to validity. So if you've got open questions, then you might get some richness in detail. You can imagine combining closed and open questions quite effectively here. So you might ask, if we go back to that question, do you like the Bridge Academy? If you had the Likert scale initially, so I like the Bridge Academy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you can get a percentage of people's responses. But then if you put a little box below it and say add detail, then people can add that extra detail. You will then get more truthful, rich, deep, detailed information about that person's thoughts and feelings and beliefs. You can get some data from questionnaires which is actually 100% valid. And this might sound quite strange because much of it is not qualitative. But if you think about things like date of birth or gender or marital status, this data is either right or wrong. And questionnaires will be a really effective way of collecting that valid data, that those hard statistics, which are just either true or they're not true, and they're very simple and easy to identify. There's no Hawthorne effect, so the vast majority of questionnaires are not completed with the researcher watching you, and so you are unlikely to change your behaviour as a result. Okay, so this is the big one, the negatives for questionnaires. We've been very positive about questionnaires so far. There are some significant negatives. It's worth just briefly mentioning on the positives here. There is less social desirability bias than interviews because you don't have that person there, which we mentioned before. So, a questionnaire is an artificial creation by the researcher. Now, what does that mean? If I give you a questionnaire, I have framed your answers. I have already decided the questions that you will be asked and the answers that you will give. That pre-coding has taken away your freedom, your decisions, your beliefs, and it has given them my framework. So it's an artificial creation. It's just my invention rather than you, the participant. And so this doesn't allow the participant to express their true beliefs and their true ideas about the way that society works for them. We are imposing our own perspective, and we end up with a reflection of our perspective, not a reflection of the participant's perspective. So it's superficial. Often the data that we collect is very, very simple. So yes, no, 1, 2, 3, 4. This very, very simple quantitative data. That question, do you like the Bridge Academy? If you respond with a quantitative, a 3 for don't know, what do we really know? Because your actual answer might be, well, I really enjoy A-levels. I didn't really enjoy GCSEs, and I enjoyed year 7, 8, and 9. Now that's a much more complex answer. Which leads on to many more questions. Questionnaires can't do that. Interviews are much better at getting into that kind of deep, rich detail. We also, with questionnaires, have no idea whether they're being truthful. So a good example of this is you have to fill out a GP form when you register with your GP, and they will ask questions like around smoking, around alcohol consumption. They will ask those questions in order to try and help you with your health. But there's been a lot of evidence that people just lie on those and that they will underplay how many cigarettes they smoke and they will underplay how much alcohol they drink. Why do they do this? Well, they want to be approved of by their doctor. They want the doctor to think that they're a good person. And that's social desirability bias, wanting people to like you. People are likely to do that with questionnaires. Lacking complexity in answers. So society is complicated. Human beings are. Questionnaires lack complexity in their answers. Society is incredibly complicated, and individual people's beliefs and ideas are incredibly complicated. Their emotions, they may not even be aware of the reasons why they do things. And so with questionnaires, you're only really getting very simplistic snapshots of people's ideas. You're not getting a rich, deep understanding of who they are. And that's why most sociologists use questionnaires as an initial stage of data collection. How many people do we have? What is their ethnicity? What is their gender? What is their age? Those kinds of hard statistics like we mentioned before. Memory. Now, one of the biggest problems with questionnaires and validity is people can't remember the actual truthful answer about their life experience. This will obviously be a particular problem with children and with much older people, and that's something that can damage the validity of our study. Right answerism. This is slightly different to social desirability bias, and it's worth just drawing that out. Social desirability bias is when you want to be liked. Right answerism is when you think there might be a correct answer to a question. So let me give you a good example for this. That question, do you like the Bridge Academy? Social desirability bias may lead you to say no, because you might want to be liked by your peers. Right answerism might lead you to tick yes, because you want to do the right answer for the teacher who's giving you the form. Okay, representativeness. Now, questionnaires are obviously fantastic when it comes to representativeness. There's huge practical benefits because they're cheap and they're easily sent out. And so what that means is we get this huge sample sizes with questionnaires, so much larger than other methods. Representativeness spelt incorrectly there. I apologise for that. Spelt very incorrectly. It can be used to compare with other research, and so because we've got these large samples, we can then measure changes in these large populations, and we can then sample certain social groups. Once we've got that hard data on certain groups, we can really easily send out questionnaires to those groups. So we can send questionnaires out to young women who have had experience of sexual harassment at work. We can target that through sending our questionnaires out to that group, and then we can get a representative data set from that group specifically. Low response rates are a real problem for representativeness, and there's an interesting reason why. So if you have a low response rate, you have a really serious problem, because as soon as not everyone in your sample has responded, only a certain type of people have responded. Let me give you an example. If I survey the whole of Year 7 about their attitudes towards the Bridge Academy, and I only get 60 out of 180 questionnaires back, the problem is going to be this. The 60 students that get that questionnaire back are likely to be the hardworking, studious, pro-school students. They're the ones who bothered to do the questionnaire and bothered to get it back to the school. They're also the ones who are more likely to have helpful parents at home that would pressure them and make sure that they do what they're supposed to do by the school. And so the data I'd get then would be totally unrepresentative. We would have no idea what students from disadvantaged backgrounds would be likely to put on that questionnaire because they were so much less likely to answer it. Height's study, she's a sociologist, and her love quiz that she sent out had a response rate of 4.5% from 100,000 questionnaires. So that's incredibly low. And that really is very damaging if you get response rates that low. So positivist or interpretivist? Well, questionnaires are favoured by positivists because they are incredibly reliable, easily replicated. They have this macro focus where you can study large-scale issues. Remember, positivists prefer to study sociology as a science, and so they want to discover laws that apply to the whole of society. So having sample sizes of thousands is much better for them because they want to try and identify the laws that helps the whole of society to function. And they also help us to spot trends amongst a whole population. Questions like how many people have been a victim of crime in a certain time period. That kind of quantitative question is the kind of question positivists want to answer. Now, as I said, interpretivists may use questionnaires with open questions, but the vast majority of the time they would prefer participant observation or unstructured interviews. Exam questions, so pretty simple here. Outline and explain 2 limitations of using online questionnaires in sociological research. That would be paper 1 or paper 3. 2 limitations of using them, where you would want to probably just go for validity and practical here, and then just tick on through. For the 20 marker, evaluate the use of questionnaires in sociological research. That's where you can apply everything that's been in this presentation. Okay, I hope that was helpful.